All right, hello, welcome to our final online module of our spring 2020 semester. In this module, we're going to talk a little bit about observational research design, and then we'll do some course wrap-up. All right, so here's our agenda for today. We are going to talk about observational design, we'll talk about making reliable and valid observations, and then we'll talk about the paper, the last paper of the semester that you guys read on territorial parking. And then we'll do some wrapping up activities. We'll talk about what the final exam is going to look at, and we'll do a little reflection on course content, and then we'll talk about what is next, i.e. what is last in the course. All right, so let's go ahead and start by talking about observational design and specifically talking about making reliable and valid observations. All right, so with observational research, the idea is that researchers are watching and systematically recording people, so people's behavior, what are they doing? Now, quick note about this, if you think about psychology, we're typically talking about studying people's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. With observational research, we can only access the behaviors piece of that, right? We can't observe people's thoughts, we can't observe people's feelings. That requires things like self-report and maybe physiological methods. But with observational research, we're really just watching people's behavior. What are they doing? What can we see them doing? And this is often a basis for frequency claims. So what percent of people do X? Technically speaking, if you think way back to Milgram, when we read the Milgram shock study, that was actually an observational study, right? It wasn't self-report, it wasn't physiological, it was observational. Researchers were observing at what button in that shock machine would people stop and refuse to keep obeying. And if you might recall that Milgram study was a frequency claim. It was saying 65% of people obeyed up to the maximum level on the shock machine. So observational research often is, but not always, often is a basis for frequency claims. However, it's not just frequency claims that you can use observational research for. You can also use observational research to operationalize a variable for an association claim or a causal claim. So if you think about last week's module, you read the Darlene Latine paper on helping behavior. That DV was an observational DV. Researchers were observing whether people would attempt to get help for the Confederate who's having a seizure or not, right? That wasn't self-report, it wasn't physiological, it was observational. You might remember way back when we talked about measuring variables, I've been mentioning these three ways that we can measure variables through self-report, through observation, through physiological, right? We're kind of talking about this observational piece in this section. All right. Now, one of the things that's kind of talked about in the textbook, but I think is worth mentioning again, is the sort of trade-off, the pros and cons of observation versus self-report as ways to operationalize a variable. And there are, of course, pros and cons to both, right? If you think about a con of self-report measures, people cannot always self-report accurately. There's lots of things people can self-report accurately about, but there's also lots of stuff that we cannot self-report accurately about. So for example, my favorite example of this is, what if I ask you, or if I ask a big group of people, hey guys, how racist are you, right? I'm not going to have people be like, oh yes, I'm super racist. Everyone's going to be like, oh no, I'm not racist at all. I'm not at all, 0%. But that's not true, right? So people cannot always self-report accurately. They're not always able to access that kind of information or able to be honest about it in self-reports. So that's a downside to the self-report measurement type, is that people are not always honest. However, that doesn't mean that observational measurements are always the best. And that's because they take a lot of effort, way more than self-report. It takes way more time to observe people's behavior than it does to just ask them about it. And importantly, observational methods, observational measurements can be biased in some really important ways that might really affect the quality of the data, the constructability of the data. And that's those three things that you read about in the chapter: observer bias, observer effects, and reactivity. These three things are all potential threats when we're doing observational research, whether it's an observational study design or an observational measurement for a variable, an association or causal claim, whatever it is, we always have to be worried about these three potential threats to the constructability of our observational measures. So let's talk about these in a little more detail. All right, so three main threats to constructability of observations: observer bias, observer effects, and reactivity. What I recommend you do is take a second to pause the video and answer these questions. Right now it's just, what is observer bias? What is observer effects? What is reactivity? So take a minute to pause the video, answer that out loud. Remember, it's that teach the material thing, right? Give a verbal answer out loud, and then you can continue the video to hear and to kind of check your answer. All right, so What is observer bias? First off, observer bias is seeing what you want to see. In this case, it's observers recording information in line with their own expectations. So, say an observer is watching kids play on a playground. That was an example from the measurement chapter with like reliability and stuff. So imagine that's the observation that's being made. Say that an observer has a specific bias. Maybe they think that little boys are going to play more rambunctiously than little girls, and so maybe that kind of filters in and tints their observations so that they record the boys as being more rowdy than the girls. Not because there really is a difference, but because that observer has a bias. And importantly, that observer might not even know that they have that bias. They might not even be realizing that's influencing them. And when you take social psychology, you'll learn a lot more about how we can be influenced even without realizing it by lots of different things. And so that's always an issue with observations. Are people being biased? Are they recording things accurately, or are they being biased when they're making those measurements? Because with observation, the data is the recording, what the researcher is recording. So the fact that it can be biased in this way is potentially a big problem. All right, next up, what are observer effects? This is going further than just observer bias. This is creating what you expect to see. So in this case, the researcher might have some expectations about what's going to happen. They might give very subtle cues to the participants. And again, they might not even realize they're doing this, right? And then that might change the participant's behavior. So they might pick up on those cues and change what they're doing. And the participant might not be aware of it either, by the way. So this is like the example from the textbook of the maze bright, maze dull rats, right? Those rats were not actually bright or dull, they were just rats. But the students in that study, who were the participants, they were told that they were maze bright or maze dull. And then lo and behold, the maze bright rats did a lot better and the maze dull rats did a lot worse. Not because they were actually bright or dull, but because the students, the participants, treated the rats differently based on what they expected them to be like. And so they created what they expected to see. Another example would be Clever Hans, right? This example of the horse that can do math. But really, it's not that the horse can do math, it's that the horse is picking up on very subtle cues from the owner, and the owner did not realize they were giving off those cues at all. And that was only determined in that case when somebody new tried this kind of task with people who did not know the answers to the questions. And if the person asking the question didn't know the answer, Clever Hans wouldn't get it right? Because there were no cues to pick up on for when to stop tapping his hoof. So that's creating what you expect to see, not just recording what you expect to see, which is observer bias, but observer effects is actually creating it. So you can think about the stronger term of effects rather than just bias as you're creating what you're expecting to see. And that's, of course, hi cat, that's a big problem too. And then lastly, reactivity. So this is on the side of the participants, not the researchers, but it's still an issue that we have to be thinking about. So reactivity is when participants are behaving differently because they know they're being watched. So for example, maybe a classroom of kids knows that there's an observer there, and so they're going to be especially well behaved, even more so than they usually would be, right? They're changing their behavior because they know they're being watched. And there's lots of cases where this would be problematic. It would compromise the validity of your measurement, because with reactivity, what you're really measuring is what the people are doing because they're being watched, not their actual natural behavior. So those are all three. They're different types of threats, but they're all three threats that we have to keep in mind. And these threats don't exist for self-report, right? There are other potential issues with self-report, like not responding accurately, but these particular things aren't an issue in self-report. And so we've talked a couple times this class about how there's not necessarily one right answer to a lot of things, like what's the best operationalization, or should I choose self-report or observational measurement, that kind of stuff. There's not really one correct answer. It really requires critical thinking. You have to think through the potential pitfalls, the potential downfalls. You have to think through the pros and cons and use that to make a decision about what you think is going to be the best. All right, now this is not one of our activities for the module. It's just a quick little test that you can use to check your knowledge. Here's a question for you. Does each example that I'm going to show you below, does this reflect observer bias, observer effects, or reactivity in a study on arm strength and mood? You can watch my cat in the background if you're bored. All right, so I'm going to read off the three examples, and then I'm going to have you pause the video and decide which is which, and then you can start the video again to hear the answers. All right, here's the first example. A study participant performs with more arm strength in the happy mood condition because of subtle encouraging cues from the research assistant. The second one, a research assistant records the participant as stronger in the happy condition than the sad condition because that fits the hypothesis. And the third one, a study participant feels self-conscious in the experiment and doesn't perform as well as usual. All right, so pause the video and think about whether each of these would be observer bias, observer effects, or reactivity. And once you're ready, go ahead and restart it to check your answers. Caterpillar is really having fun appearing on these videos. You might even, oh, she's gonna knock some things off. Yep, that's how she keeps herself entertained. All right, so does each of these examples reflect observer bias, observer effects, or reactivity? So starting with A study participant performs with more arm strength in the happy mood condition because of subtle encouraging cues from the research assistant. That would be observer effects, because in that case, the research assistant's expectations are creating an actual change in the participant's behavior. So the participant is catching onto those little cues, and it actually makes them perform better. So it's not just a bias in recording, it's actually a change in literal performance because of the experimenter, because of the observer. All right, and then B, a research assistant records the participant as stronger in the happy condition than the sad condition because that fits the hypothesis. That would be observer bias, because in that case, it's about the recording. So it's not a difference in actual behavior, it's a difference in the recording. So the observer knows the hypothesis, which in this case would be that people might be stronger in a happy condition when they're in a happy mood. So in this case, the observer, the researcher, knows the hypothesis, and they observe behavior that fits it. So it's not literally what's happening, it's the observer's bias. The observer is seeing what they expect to see. It's like confirmation bias. If you remember back to the intuition biases earlier in the semester, this is basically confirmation bias. You're seeing what you think you're going to see, and so that's what you record. But it's not necessarily the truth. All right, and then C, a study participant feels self-conscious in the experiment and doesn't perform as well as usual. That would be reactivity. So that's not about the researcher anymore, right? It's just about the participant. They're feeling self-conscious because they're being observed, and that affects their performance. They're not performing as strongly in that arm strength test as they might have otherwise. All right. Okay, so what I have here on the screen is a screenshot of a 2014 media article. It's called Parents on Smartphones Ignore Their Kids Study Finds. This is not the full article. I just cropped the first little bit of it here that gives you information about the study. What I want you to do is take a second. Well, actually, I'm going to show you the questions first, and then I'll have you pause the video, read through this article, and then think about the questions. So this, again, is still not one of the activities. It's just a quick little check for you. So I want you to think about this. I'm going to read you these two things to think about, and then I'll have you pause the video. So I want you to think about whether the observational measures in this study, based on what you can read in this screenshot, would they be susceptible to observer bias, observer effects, or reactivity? So think about them one at a time. Think about whether any of these three threats could be a potential issue in this study. And then what would you need to ask about the study design in order to decide whether these biases were present? So what would you need to do? What would you need to know about this research study in order to know whether any of these things really were a threat based on the study methodology? All right, so I recommend you take a second, pause the video, read through the excerpt on the left side of the screen, and then think about the answers to these questions on the right side. And then when you're ready to hear me talk through it, go ahead and restart the video. Okay, so if we're thinking about whether the observational measures in this study could be susceptible to observer bias, observer effects, or reactivity, the key thing I want you guys to look at in this excerpt here is where they are, let's see, in the second little paragraph there, they went undercover in 15 local fast food restaurants to observe nature's parenting playground, excuse me. Watching silently from a distance, they observed the interactions between family members, noting in particular the reactions children had when mom or dad punched away at the portable keys. That's kind of the main thing here. A lot of these at least two of these potential issues can be resolved if participants don't know that they're being watched. Now, you might think that that raises an issue with ethics about whether if people don't know they're being watched, is that okay? Is that still ethical to observe people for a research project? And the answer to that is Yes, as long as it's in a public space. So as long as it's in a public place where people don't have a reasonable expectation to privacy, then in that case you can observe people without them knowing that they're participants, because again they're in public. It's just like people watching, right? You could go people watching at restaurants even if you're not doing a research project, and nobody's going to be like, oh, you can't do that. It's the same kind of thing for research projects. As long as it's in a public space, it's okay. So a local fast food restaurant, that's acceptable. If you think back when we were in the ethics module, we talked about that one study where participants were in the bathroom with the male participants, and they stood right next to them or one urinal over, and then they measured how long it took them to pee. If you remember that study, that's not very ethical, because you have a reasonable expectation to privacy in a bathroom in a way that you wouldn't in a restaurant. Anyway, that's enough of that digression. So could these be susceptible to these three problems? The fact that they were watching silently from a distance, that there's nothing in this excerpt that suggests that people knew they were being watched, that means you can rule out observer effects and reactivity. If they don't know they're being watched, they can't be reactive, right? Because reactivity involves being, if you know that you're being watched and then you change your behavior. So if you don't know you're being watched, you can't be reactive. And if you don't know you're being watched, you can't be affected by cues from the researcher, because again, that requires you have to be paying attention to the researcher in order to pick up on cues from them. So we can rule out observer effects and reactivity based on the fact that it seems like nobody was aware that they were being watched. Now that, however, is a question you would need to ask about the study design, is did any of the people observed pick up on the fact that they were being watched? So did anybody make eye contact with the researcher, or did anybody, in any way seem to be aware that they're being watched? That's something you have to know for sure, for 100% sure, whether you can rule out those two threats. The only one that you could think about might really be a problem is observer bias, and that's a problem no matter what. Basically, in any observational study with any kind of an observational measurement, observer bias is always a problem you have to be aware of, because observational research, by definition, requires researchers to be recording behavior. So there is always the possibility that they will be biased in what they're recording based on their preconceptions. You can think about how that might work here. If, say that the researcher, the observer who's making these observations, say that they have their own hypothesis, or they know the hypothesis for the study, that they think if people are on their mobile devices that they're going to be distracted, they're not going to pay attention to their kids, they're going to ignore their kids. If you have that belief, then that can bias what you see. So you might observe something that objectively maybe isn't indicative of ignoring kids, but you might record it that way because that's what you believe. And again, you might not even realize you're doing that, right? It's confirmation bias. You're seeing what you expect to see. It's an intuition bias we all have. Researchers are not exempt from intuition biases. We're just hopefully a little more aware of them and make strides to avoid them. That's part of good research design, to avoid any issues like this with confirmation bias, with other intuition biases. All right, so hopefully that was an interesting activity for you. All right, now here's our first official activity for the module. So activity number 1 is to plan an observational study. So your job in this activity is to plan an observational study to see whether men or women are more likely to hold open a door for another person. Now notice I underlined these two things because that's the two variables. You're looking to see whether men or women are more likely to hold open a door for someone else. So you have to think about measurements for each of those variables. And as you plan your study, you want to keep construct validity in mind. All right, so there's 5 parts here. A is to come up with an operational definition of what it means to hold the door for somebody. Your operational definition should be clear enough that if you ask 2 friends to use it to code holding the door behavior, it would have good reliability and validity. In other words, it's got to be more specific than just are they holding open the door. You have to think about how you could define that very concretely so that 2 different observers would be able to categorize something based on your operational definition. That's part A. Part B, will observers be biased about what they record? So we have observer bias, if so, how? Part C, will observers influence the people they're observing? So will you have observer effects? If so, how? Part D, how will you evaluate the inter-rater reliability of your observers? So remember, your observers are observing holding the door behavior. They're recording that. So you're going to have more than one people. You've got your 2 friends using it to code holding the door behavior, right? How would you evaluate the inter-rater reliability of those 2 observers? So think back to the measurement chapter. And then part E, lastly, would the results you get from this study be an example of a frequency claim, an association claim, or a causal claim? And discuss how you know what it is. So if you do find a link between gender and holding the door open for somebody else, what of those three types of claims, which would it be? How do you know which it is? All right, so you know the drill by now. You're probably tired of doing this by now. Open up a document, write down your answers to this activity, and then submit it to the submission portal. And then once you're ready to continue onward, come back and we will restart the video and we'll keep going. All right, next on the agenda is talking about the article. So this is the last article that you read this semester. Pat yourselves on the back. You read a lot of articles this semester. This is the last one, the longest one, and the one with the most studies, but I hope you found it entertaining. So let's go ahead and talk about it. All right, so what are the main takeaways from this journal article? I want you to pause the video, think back what the main takeaways are, and then restart it when you're ready to check your response. Okay, so I would say the main takeaways from this journal article are that people get territorial over parking spaces, which is kind of hilarious. I really enjoy this article. They talk in the introduction about how people get territorial when there are resources they want to conserve, but this idea of parking space that you're leaving, you don't even need that resource anymore. If somebody's waiting for it, somebody else wants the resource that you're vacating, you'll actually get territorial over it, and you'll be slower to leave if somebody's waiting, and especially slow to leave if somebody's honking at you, waiting for you to leave the parking spot. So I found that very entertaining. I hope you did too. And that's kind of the main takeaway. And they examined this question, by the way, in multiple different ways, so from multiple angles. That leads us to our second item on this slide here. So each of the three studies use different methodologies: experimental design, correlational design, and observational design, the designs we've talked about in the last couple weeks. Which study used which methodology? So I want you to pause the video, look back at the studies if you need to for hints in the method section, and think about which of those three studies was an experimental design, which was a correlational design, and which was an observational design. And then once you have your answers, you can go to continue the video to check them. All right, study one was an observational design, and you can see that because early in that study, that part of the paper on that study, they mentioned that it's naturalistic observation. So naturalistic observation is a type of observational design. Importantly, in this study, study one, they did not manipulate anything, right? They were just observing what was happening. So they just recorded, you know, was there a person waiting or not, and then they examined, they also recorded how long it took for people to leave based on whether there was somebody waiting or not. So that was purely observational. They didn't manipulate anything. It was just observing what was happening. Study number two was an experimental design. So in this case, the researchers were not just observing what happened. They were still observing a variable, but this is an example of using observation as a variable operationalization inside of a different study design. So this is an experimental design where they manipulated two independent variables, actually. They manipulated the type of car, low status or high status, and then they manipulated whether the Confederate is honking or not. So in one condition, the Confederate is just waiting in the car for the spot. In another condition, they're waiting and they honk once. And then there's a couple of control conditions where they just drive past, kind of a distraction condition, as well as a pure control condition where there are no cars as the person is leaving. So the researcher is messing with that independent variable in this case, right? They are manipulating two independent variables, actually. And so that's the experimental design. They're trying to make a cause and effect claim that the status of the car might matter, and the level of intrusion, as they phrase it in the article, might matter as well. Those two different independent variables might impact how long it takes for people to leave a parking space, or rather how long they might wait and linger, how territorial they're getting. Study three then was a correlational design. And you know this is correlational because, for one thing, the researchers are not manipulating anything, right? They're not changing anything. It's also not observational because the researchers are not recording observations of behavior. In this case, they just distributed a survey to some people at the mall parking lot, and they were asking them to self-report their beliefs. So they're asking them to self-report about how long they would take and whether they would be faster or slower if somebody was waiting and if somebody honked, and what they think other people would do. So that's all self-report measurements, and self-report measurements are pretty much always indicative of correlational design. So study one, observation; study two, experiment; study three, correlation. All right, now I know I can't really hear your responses because you're just watching this from home, you're not in class, but I hope you did find this paper interesting, and I wonder if you might have seen people be territorial over parking spaces in real life. I definitely have, so I hope that this was something that was interesting and real life applicable for you as well. All right, that takes us to activity number 2. This is identifying methods concepts in this article. All right, now your job in this activity is to comb through this paper and identify as many concepts from our research methods course as you can find. This is our last module, right? It's our online week 6 module, the last one before you take the final exam. So I'm using this to kind of give you a little practice with going back and looking at old concepts, from throughout the class. We're going to talk more about this in a minute, but the final exam that you're going to take in next week's module, the last module of the class, the final exam that you're going to take in that module does have a cumulative section. So the cumulative section is going to revisit concepts from earlier parts of the class, from before spring break, from even the very first couple weeks of the class. So what I recommend you do is use this activity as a chance to go back and revisit those concepts. And there's a couple of different ways that you might want to do that. So for example, you might start with your previous study guides. You're going to make another one for the final exam as one of your final assignments, but you might go back and dig up your study guide number 2 that you submitted before the take-home exam, and especially your study guide number 1 that you submitted before the first exam in the class. You might go back and look through those, refresh yourself on those concepts, and then think about which of those concepts you can see in any way in this particular paper. I have a couple of recommendations here for you. So you could locate concepts from any segment of our course, and I listed here the different kind of topics that we talked about. So you can use this as kind of a guide to go back through maybe your notes and look for things that you might locate as being interesting things that are happening in this paper. Again, I recommend use this as a review opportunity to revisit ideas from throughout the class, see what you can identify within this paper. And I'm going to give you a little extra incentive here. If you explain each concept well, so you can't just say, oh, I saw this happening. Oh, I saw reliability. For you to take advantage of this bullet point, I really need you to tell me what the concept is. So, here's the type of reliability I saw. It's looking at this. And where specifically it shows up in the paper, like, oh, I saw it in the study 1 methodology right here. If you explain each concept well, and you explain more than 5 concepts, then I'm going to give you some extra credit. You'll notice I'm vague here. I'm saying some extra credit. I haven't actually done this as an activity before, so I don't know how many concepts you guys are going to come up with, and so I didn't want to promise a certain points amount, but I will, after I have seen everybody's module responses, I'll let you know what I'm going to do extra credit-wise. But this is a little extra incentive for you to take this seriously, right? To really use it as a review opportunity. Go see as many things as you can find. One more thing about this bullet point too, it has to be accurate, right? You can't tell me that you saw internal reliability when really it was inter-rater. That won't count. So after the first 5 accurate, well-explained concepts, then each accurate, well-explained concept after that, I'll give you a little extra credit for. Here's a hint to get you started, just in case these instructions are confusing because we're not in class. And because I'm giving you this hint, I'm not going to count it toward the first 5 concepts in that previous bullet point. But here's a hint to get you started. You can find reliability info reported in each of the studies. So hopefully that will help you get started. That's the kind of thing I'm looking for here. Like, oh, I saw this type of reliability and I saw it right here. That's the kind of stuff I'm looking for here. And by the way, if you have a question or you want to double check that you're being thorough enough or whatever, feel free to email me. I'm more than happy to chat with you by email about that. All right, but again, you know the drill for this. This is actually the last official activity that you'll do. So grab a Word document, write out your answers. If you want to take advantage of this extra credit opportunity, be sure you are explaining the concepts well and explaining where they come up in the paper. And maybe number your concepts too. That would be helpful for me as well. And then once you've done that, you can submit that to the submission portal for activity number 2, and then come back to the video and we will continue onward. All right, so that was our pretty quick coverage of observational design. It's pretty quick because we've actually talked about observation before in the class, like in the variable measurement chapter, we talked about it there. So this is just kind of going a little more into depth than we've talked about previously. But we will take the last little bit of time today to do some wrapping up activities. So first I want to talk to you about the final exam, and then I want to talk to you about reflecting on course content. So first off, the final exam. The final exam is going to be all short answer. It's going to be pretty similar to take-home exam number 2, but it's worth 200 points total, whereas take-home exam 2 as well as exam 1 were worth 100 points each. Now this is worth double the points. So this is just like the take-home exam number 2. This will be open note, open book, so you can use whatever resources you want. But just like exam number 2, don't collaborate with your classmates. It's still an exam. It's a test of your knowledge, not your classmates' knowledge. So work on it by yourself, but use whatever resources you want for that. And this will be due Tuesday, May 12th by 11:59 p.m. This is one of the latest times I could make this due to give you the most time to get it done, because final grades are going to be due the Friday of that week, May 15th, I think. And so that means I have to be submitting final grades on the 15th. So I tried to give you a late due date. So hopefully that will be helpful for you. All right, now the first half of the exam is non-cumulative. That's the first 100 points of the exam, and that's covering the stuff that we've talked about since exam number 2. So that's experimental design, it's reading experiment articles, it's correlational design, and it's this section on observation as well. The second half then is the cumulative piece, and that's the remaining 100 points of the exam. So the cumulative piece covers all topics from throughout the class, but it is mostly big picture ideas, meaning concepts that you've seen in multiple places this semester. So I'm not going to be super nitty gritty on the cumulative section. I'm not going to ask you like, what happened in paragraph 2 of the Bushman paper? I'm not going to do that. It's big picture ideas, things that are important concepts and methods that you've seen come up in multiple places this semester. As usual, you have lots of resources for this exam. So you are going to be making one more study guide number 3. So you can use that to study early and often. I highly recommend you start making it now, even if you haven't already. This is not going to be due until the same time as the final exam is due. So the study guide will also be due on May 12th. But I recommend you start it now, especially if you finish this module a little bit early, got a little extra time. Go ahead and start making your study guide. It can only help you. I recommend you also quiz yourself using the homework questions, so you can try answering them again without looking at your notes and then check your answers. Oh, I don't have this on the slide, but I also recommend you take a look back at the exit ticket recap videos that I've made for the online modules. That might help you as well to kind of hear me talking through those concepts for things that we had covered online that we didn't actually have class for you to understand them from. You can form a study group with your classmates, so you can use your classmate contact info from the syllabus, see who else might be interested, and you can also use me as a resource. Don't forget that, right? So you can email me to set up a Zoom meeting, or you can just talk to me via email. If you have any last-minute questions, I'm more than happy to chat about that. All right, so the last wrapping up activity I have for you then is to do a little bit of reflection on course content and to talk about what comes next in the psychology major. All right, first off, you made it. This is the end, right? Next week, you're taking the final exam, and then that's it. You'll be done. So pat yourselves on the back. You got through a semester. You got through a heck of a semester, actually. Like, this is what a weird time to be learning Methods 1, right? But you guys are troopers. You've been doing really well, completing all the online stuff. So pat yourself on the back double for getting through this online semester. All right, what I want to talk about right now a little bit is topics this semester. So this is just on this slide here, there's just a list of the topics we've covered. These are just from the syllabus, basically. But we covered all this stuff. So if you think back to when we first started this class and you first started hearing about topics in methods. And now think of how far you've come since then. You've learned so much. You have so much more knowledge about psychology methods now than you did at the beginning of the semester. All right, and speaking of that, I want to take a second to talk about the last assignment in this week's module, which is the course wrap-up assignment. This wasn't originally part of the points for this class, but because on the last day of class we would usually be doing some wrap-up activities, we would be doing some reflection activities. Because we aren't able to do that, because we're online now, I made this assignment to give you an alternate way to still get that end of course experience. So this is the last assignment in this week's module, this reflection. It's just worth 5 points. It's just a couple points. And I'm grading it on completion and thoughtfulness. I'm not grading it on like accuracy or something like that. It's just a way for you to get a couple more points and to do some nice metacognitive reflection on the course. I've uploaded the prompt in the submission portal. Both of these are in this week's module, so you can find them both there. And you do need to look at the prompt because that's where the questions are for this. So I have specific questions I want you to answer. And you'll see on the document, the prompt document has a little more detail about these. But basically, I want you for this course wrap-up reflection to tell me what the 3 most important things you learned were. And I don't mean like what's the most important, like there's no right answer, basically is what I'm trying to say here. It's just what do you think are the 3 most important things you learned? And then tell me about how this class prepared you for future classes and for your career, how you might use these skills in your career. The third one is to give some advice to my students for next semester. You might remember that at the beginning of this semester, I showed you some snippets from advice letters from my students last semester. I can't do this in the same format I usually would with handwritten letters, which is what we would have done on the last day of class. But I made this part of the reflection so that you could still give some advice that I could tell to my students next semester. And then the last one is feedback for me, and that's because given the pandemic, where BSU is not doing course evaluations, but I still want to know your feedback. I still really value your feedback. We did mid-semester feedback partway through the semester, and that was helpful for me. And I want to have some end of semester feedback from you. So you'll see I have more detail in the prompt, but I'm interested in hearing what was helpful for you to help you learn this material, what was maybe not so helpful, what you wish I'd done differently. And I do really want you to be honest. I really value your feedback, and I use it to make this course better. Every semester I make this course better by, I make all my courses better by getting feedback from my students. So please feel free to give me constructive criticism. That's usually really helpful for me to hear about what I could change and do differently. Okay, so don't forget about that. I'll have a little reminder at the end of the slides too, do not forget about this. But that's kind of the last thing before the final exam that you'll do. And it is due in this week's module. All right, now here on the slide, you can see a little map of the psychology major curriculum. We talked about this on, I think, the first day as well, but it bears repeating here. So if you think about the psychology major, it's kind of divided into these 3 different types of classes, 3 different levels, of classes. You're starting out in the foundation classes, so everybody's done intro psych already. You're taking the orientation of the psych major class, you're taking cultural psychology, you're taking stats for psych, you're taking research methods 1, and once you've completed all 5 of those foundation courses, then you're ready to take methods 2, as well as 4 of those 5 pillar courses, social, abnormal, developmental, learning, memory, and biopsych. So you take 4 of those 5 pillar courses in methods 2, and then once you've done that, you're ready to take the advanced courses. And there are senior seminars like Psych of Women and Mindfulness. There's classes like Cognitive Psych, Clinical Psych, Sensation and Perception, IO Psych, that's Industrial Organizational Psych, Personality of Psych Personality, and actually quite a few other advanced courses as well. But that's kind of the general map, right? So right now you're in the foundation, and maybe after this semester, maybe you're getting ready to move into the pillar. I want to have a quick reminder for you guys that you do need to have a C or better in Methods 1, Stats, and Methods 2 in order to complete your psych degree or to move on to the upper courses. These are the only courses in the major that we have grade requirements for, and I want to take just a second and talk about what that means, especially given this semester. So quick grading note. If you earn less than a C this semester, even if it's just a C minus, even if you miss it by maybe 1 percentage point, you still have to retake Methods 1 before you can continue on to Methods 2 and the pillar courses. That's what that grade requirement means. If you don't get the C or better, you have to retake Methods 1. I think most people are on track to get that C or better. And when I sent you the email a couple weeks ago with whether you're missing any assignments, I gave you grade information there too, so you can go take a quick look at that if you want to double check what your grade was at that point. The thing I want to mention specifically for this semester is that this grade requirement of C or better, it still stands right now. So even if you switch to pass-fail grading in this semester, you still have to get that C or better in order to continue on, in order to meet this course requirement. So say you get a C minus in the course and you switch it to a pass grade, you could do that, but it's not going to fulfill the requirement for you to continue on to Methods 2 and the pillar courses. You would still, even if you have a pass in this course with a C minus, you would still have to retake it. So I just wanted to mention that so you guys kind of have that in mind, that you do still have to meet that C or better requirement. All right, now one thing that might, if you're like hearing me say this, you're like, oh my God, what the heck? One thing that might help you is to get a quick reminder of the grading promise that I made to everybody. So here's the grading promise. As long as you complete all the online assignments in good faith with your best effort, I will take the higher of either your mid-semester pre-spring break grade or your final grade. And I made that promise to you to kind of help alleviate some of the nerves that come from suddenly going online. I know a lot of you don't like taking online classes, and some of you might feel like you're not learning as well online as you were in person. I totally get that. That's why I made this promise, so that you know, as long as you're completing everything, you're doing everything, because you do have to do it, right? You need to have this knowledge to be able to succeed in Methods 2 and beyond. As long as you're making an effort to do everything, then I'm going to take either your pre-spring break grade, that's all the stuff from our in-person face-to-face class, or your final grade, whichever is higher. That means that if your mid-semester grade was at least a C, and again, that information is in the email that I sent to you guys a couple weeks ago with the update on missing assignments. If your mid-semester grade was at least a C and you complete all the online assignments, or if your final grade, your total final grade is at least a C, you're going to pass the class and move on. So that means that, say your mid-semester grade was a C and your total final grade is a C minus, as long as you have completed all the online assignments, I will take that C instead of the C minus. So whichever one is higher, as long as you complete all the online assignments. But again, that does require you to do all the online assignments in order for this grade promise to work. All right, so hopefully that will help you kind of think about how this is going to work. If you have questions about how this is going to work, let me know. I do have it on my to-do list for the last week of the semester when I'm grading all the final exams, that I'm going to be sending you all an email, and I'm going to tell you what your mid-semester grade was, what your total final grade is, and which one I'm submitting. In that week, I'll also let you know if you're still missing any assignments, because again, if you are missing assignments, then the grading promise is invalidated and you just get the final grade, whatever that is. So I will notify you if you're still missing assignments in the final week of the semester. And one more thing I want to mention here, by the way, is that if you are missing, say you're missing like one more assignment and you just can't quite get it done before final grades are due, I can give you an incomplete in the class, or even if you're missing several assignments because maybe you've fallen behind, maybe you got sick, maybe you've had crazy work schedule. Whatever it is, if you're not able to catch up before the semester officially ends, I can give you an incomplete. It might kick you out of your fall classes if you're trying to take pillar courses that require this. An incomplete will kick you out of those temporarily. But once you've completed the final work and finished all the requirements, then I'll update your grade and you'll be ready to keep going. So if that's something that you might be interested in, if you feel like you're falling behind, just email me and I'm more than happy to chat with you. All right. Okay, what I want to talk about now for just a couple minutes is the next item in the next class in the sequence, basically. If you've done all the foundation courses, those 5 foundation courses, including Methods 1, then you're ready to take Methods 2. And I want to talk to you for just a second about what that class is all about and what to expect from that class. Here's a quick little Methods 2 preview. This is the course description for Methods 2. So building upon knowledge and skills gained from Stats for Psych and Methods, this course will focus on how to ethically conduct research in psychology, including the development, execution, and analysis of an empirical project. Students will conduct at least one research project to demonstrate, apply, and extend their knowledge of research methods in psychology. Students will use SPSS statistical software for both descriptive and inferential analyses, and write at least one APA-style research paper that includes a literature review, description of methodology, analysis of data, and discussion of the findings. That means you actually get to conduct research in Methods 2, which is super exciting. So you have been gaining skills in this class to understand basics of research design. Once you've taken stats, you've also learned some basics of how we analyze data. And when you take Methods 2, you're going to merge those two together. You're going to marry those skills together in order to ask and answer a psychological research question, which is pretty exciting. So you get to actually do the research process. If you have all the prereqs done, so you have all the other foundation courses done, I recommend taking Methods 2 sooner rather than later, because you can take Methods 2 and the pillar courses in any order or at the same time, whatever you want, but you do have to do Methods 2 before you can continue to the advanced courses. So I recommend you might as well take it sooner rather than later while the knowledge you gained in methods and your stats classes are still fresh in your mind. That's going to help you to do it sooner rather than later because you're going to remember these concepts better. You'll get some review of these concepts in Methods 2, but it'll help you remember them better if you take it sooner. So again, the purpose of that course is applying skills from stats and Methods 1. And I want to mention to you that different instructors for Methods 2 are going to have different approaches. So this course might look different depending on who you take it with. So for example, you might design a study and collect data, or you might use existing archival data to ask a new question. You might write one big paper, or you might write several short papers. You might work independently to develop your own idea, or you might work in small groups to develop a group idea, or you might work as a whole class to develop a class idea. There's also different ways that this might ways this might play out. So I recommend, if you're thinking about taking Methods 2 next semester and in the fall semester, and you are curious, like say you have one class that would fit really well in your schedule and you're curious what that's going to look like, you could always email the professor who's teaching that section and ask if they know yet what the format of their Methods 2 class will be. Now, they might not, because they might be taking the summer to plan it and create it. That's always possible. But you might as well, if you're interested to know what you're getting into, you could email them and just say, hey, I'm just curious, what's this going to look like? And you might specifically ask, like, my one paper or several short papers? Am I going to work independently or as a class? Like, you might ask those kinds of questions so they understand what it is you're asking about. All right, so that's a quick little preview of what Methods 2 will look like. I hope you're all excited to do your own research project. I'm excited for you. And I have this little box here of any questions. If you have questions about this, feel free to email me and ask. I'm more than happy to chat about what Methods 2 might look like. I'm not teaching Methods 2 next semester, but we have a lot of great other faculty who are, so I'm happy to chat with you about that. All right, now I just have a couple final thoughts I want to share with you, and then we'll wrap this up. This was a hard class, right? This is not a super easy breezy course. There's a lot of concepts that are weird to get your head around. You spend a lot of time outside of class engaging with the material, especially now in our online couple of weeks. It's all been outside of class. But you've done a lot of work. You've put in a lot of work. Think about all the homework assignments you did. Think about all the notes you took, the exams you took. You did a lot for this class. You worked hard to apply the concepts during class and in activities in our online modules. And I think now you're well prepared for Methods 2 and the rest of the psych degree. I hope that you'll take the skills that you gained this semester, things like how to read research articles, how to evaluate the phrasing of popular media headlines, and I hope that you'll apply them to your other psych courses, to your daily life, and to your career as well. That's my hope for you. I hope you got something valuable from this class. All right, so let's talk about what's next. So this week's module, the one that we're in right now, week 6, remember to submit all the assignments. So that's homework number 18, activities 1 and 2, the exit ticket, and then there's the additional assignment this week of the course wrap-up reflection. Don't forget to submit that as well. And then in next week's module, what's going to be due next week? It's just study guide number 3 and the take-home final exam. So there isn't a post-exam reflection this time. It's just study guide and the take-home final. And that's what's due next week. After that, I'm going to grade everyone's exams. It might take me a little bit because they're going to be long. So I'm going to grade everybody's exams. I'm going to let you know if I'm still missing any submissions for you for any assignments from throughout the online period. You can also, by the way, check this yourself. If you go to the grade center, you'll see anything that doesn't have a grade assigned to it, probably is because I don't have it from you. But I will let you know. I will send out emails if you're still missing anything. As well as I can give you more information then about the option to take an incomplete for the semester and finish the work in summer or fall. But again, if you're interested in that, you can also email me ahead of time and we can talk more about what that might look like. Then I'm going to email you to let you know what your final grade is. So after I've graded the exams and everything else, I'll email you to let you know what your final grade in the course is, and I'll let you know which grade, mid-semester or final, I will be posting for you. So I'll give you some notification before I post it. And then that's it. Then you're done. And then you've survived the online semester. And I hope that after that you will have a good summer. Hope you'll get some nice weather and be able to relax. And I'll see you around when we're back on campus. All right. Thanks you guys for a great class. I know this was a really weird semester, especially a weird way to do the second half of our semester online when none of us were expecting that. But you guys have been troopers. You've done really well. I think that you're still getting useful stuff from these modules, even if it's not ideal, probably. But you guys have been great students, a great class, and I'm going to miss you guys. And I'll see you around on campus when we are back face-to-face. All right, last but not least, the exit ticket for Module 6. So same as usual, what did you understand best? Your clearest point? What was your muddiest point? Do you want me to address it in a video? I will make one more exit ticket recap video to recap exit ticket questions from this module. And I'll, same as usual, I'll post the activity keys, the homework key, all that stuff. I'll post that at the beginning of next week. And then if you have any other questions or you want to set up a meeting with me in any way to talk through anything from this class, just email me to let me know and we will work that out. All right, you guys, I hope that these video lectures have been helpful for you, and I will let you go.